Imagine waking up at dawn to the sound of church bells echoing across a muddy village, knowing that today, like every day, could be your last. Picture yourself living in a world where a simple cut on your finger might kill you, where winter means watching your neighbors slowly starve, and where the very air you breathe carries diseases that have no names and no cures. And castles, but a daily struggle against hunger, disease, cold, and death itself. You're about to discover what it truly meant to survive in medieval times, when life was not an adventure story filled with knights tonight. We'll walk through the ordinary, exhausting reality of medieval existence, a world so harsh that simply reaching your 30th birthday was considered a remarkable achievement. So settle in, close your eyes, and let your mind drift back to a time when survival was the only luxury most people could afford to dream of. But before we begin this journey into the past, if you enjoy these historically grounded bedtime stories that help you drift off to sleep while learning something fascinating, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and give this video a gentle like. Your support helps us continue bringing you these soothing tales from history's most intriguing corners. Now let's step back in time together. The year is 1347, and you are Aldrich, a peasant farmer living in a small village called Millbrook in what will one day be called England. But you don't know about England, or about the future, or about the fact that historians will later call this period the Dark Ages. All you know is that you're 24 years old, which makes you practically ancient by village standards, and that you've somehow managed to survive longer than most. When it rains, which it does often, water seeps through the cracks, turning your floor into a muddy swamp. You wake before sunrise, not because you want to, but because your empty stomach gnaws at you like a persistent animal. In a world without antibiotics, without understanding of bacteria or viruses, tuberculosis is simply another way that life reminds you of its fragility. She's been coughing for weeks now, bringing up blood that stains the rags you use as bedding. You know what this means, though you dare not speak it aloud. The straw mattress beneath you, if you can call a thin layer of moldy straw mattress, provides little comfort against the hard-packed earth floor of your one-room hovel. The walls are made of wattle and daub, woven sticks plastered with mud, dung, and straw. You are bound to this land and to Lord Godwin as surely as if you wore chains. Thomas, at 6 years old, is already showing signs of the rickets that plague so many village children. His legs are beginning to bow from malnutrition, and his teeth are coming in crooked and discolored. But her constant crying and the way her ribs show through her thin skin tell you that she is fighting a battle you are not sure she can win. Your wife, Mabel, lies beside you, her breathing shallow and labored. The wasting sickness has come to your house, as it has come to so many others. Your 2 children, little Thomas and baby Mary, sleep fitfully in the corner. Baby Mary, barely 8 months old, has survived longer than many infants. Your back aches constantly from bending over crops and hauling heavy loads. The single window in your hovel, a hole in the wall covered with a piece of oiled cloth, shows the first gray hints of dawn. And no pain relief beyond a cup of ale, if you re lucky. You know that Lord Godwin's overseer will be making his rounds soon, checking to ensure that all the serfs are awake and ready for another day of backbreaking labor. You are not free to sleep in, not free to rest when you're sick, not free to make choices about how you spend your time. You rise slowly, your joints protesting. At 24, you already feel like an old man. Your hands are permanently stained with dirt and scarred from countless cuts and scrapes that never quite heal properly. Your teeth, what's left of them, ache constantly. Dental care consists of pulling out teeth that hurt too much to bear, usually with a pair of crude iron pliers. Your first task each morning is to check on your small plot of land, the few strips of field that Lord Godwin allows you to farm for your own family as survival. The rest of your time belongs to him, working his larger fields. But these few precious strips mean the difference between life and death for your family. As you step outside, the smell hits you immediately. Medieval villages don't smell like the countryside you might imagine. The village has no sewage system, no garbage collection, no concept of sanitation as we understand it. The smell is so constant that you've mostly stopped noticing it, but visitors from other villages often retch when they first arrive. They smell like human waste, animal dung, rotting food, unwashed bodies, and smoke, but the soil is always depleted. People throw their waste into the streets or into designated pits that overflow regularly. Your plot is about half an acre, enough to grow barley, oats, and perhaps a few vegetables if the weather cooperates, and if the soil isn't too depleted. You don't know about crop rotation, about fertilizers beyond animal dung, about soil chemistry or nitrogen cycles. You plant the same crops in the same spots year after year, watching the yields slowly decrease as the earth gives up its nutrients and gives back only dust. It's that simple. Your barley sprouted, then rotted in the waterlogged fields. You've seen what ergot poisoning does to people. They dance uncontrollably, scream about visions of demons, and often die in agony. This year has been particularly difficult. The spring came late, and when it finally arrived, it brought too much rain. The oats grew tall but thin, producing grain heads that rattled hollow in the wind. Sir Edmund, Lord Godwin's bailiff, is making his morning rounds. Your small vegetable garden, a few turnips, some onions, a handful of cabbage plants, has been ravaged by insects and disease. Lord Godwin requires your presence in the great field today. The harvest cannot wait. Serfs who argue with their betters find themselves in the stocks, or worse. You walk between the rows, checking each plant with the desperate attention of someone whose life depends on these struggling crops. There are no grocery stores, no food imports, no safety net. If your crops fail, you starve. And your life does depend on them. And you work it in exchange for protection and the right to farm a small plot for yourself. As you examine your barley, you notice the telltale signs of ergot, a fungus that grows on grain and produces a toxin that can cause hallucinations, convulsions, and death. You've seen families thrown off their land for failing to meet their obligations, and a few other implements that your grandfather made and that you'll pass down to Thomas if he lives long enough. The ox requires constant care and feeding, and if it dies, you'll spend years working off the debt to replace it. Hundreds of strips of land, each belonging to a different serf family, create a patchwork of different crops and different stages of growth. Riding through on his destrier, a massive warhorse worth more than your entire family will earn in a lifetime surrounded by armed knights, who look at you and your neighbors as if you were livestock. In practice, it means that you work 6 days a week on Lord Godwin's land, receiving no payment except the promise that he won't evict you and that he'll defend the village if raiders come. You'll have to burn these infected plants, losing precious food, because eating ergot-contaminated grain is worse than starving. The villagers call it St. Anthony's Fire, and they believe it's a punishment from God. You'll walk behind this plow for miles today, guiding the ox, fighting with rocks and roots, stopping frequently to clear debris from the blade. The village can't afford to feed him properly. Hay and grain are too precious to waste on animals when people are hungry. Each family gets to use Bruno for a certain number of days per year, and those days are precious beyond measure. Some years, that's nothing at all. As the sun rises higher, you hear the sound of hoofbeats on the muddy village road. The church takes another 10% as tithe. That leaves you with perhaps 20% of what you produce to feed your family for an entire year. And the church their full share first, leaving your family with whatever remains. Sir Edmund is a minor nobleman, which means he can read a little, owns a horse, and has the authority to make your life miserable if you displease him. Lord Godwin takes 60% of everything you produce. Aldrich, he calls out, his voice carrying the authority of someone who has never known hunger. It's not enough, and you can see him growing weaker each day. You want to explain that your own crops need attention, that your family will starve if you don't tend to your small plot, but you know better than to argue. You've seen men flogged for showing insufficient respect to their lords. The feudal system is elegantly simple in its cruelty. Lord Godwin owns the land. In theory, this arrangement benefits everyone. But Lord Godwin lives in a stone castle 15 miles away. The iron for the plow blade cost you 2 months' worth of eggs from your chickens. He visits the village perhaps twice a year. His protection is theoretical. His demands are immediate and constant. You gather your tools, a wooden plow pulled by an ox you share with 3 other families, a sickle for cutting grain, a flail for threshing. These tools represent a significant investment. The great field stretches before you like a brown ocean. You can see your neighbors already at work, bent figures moving slowly through the grain, their movements economical and practiced. Medieval farming is backbreaking work performed with primitive tools. Your plow is little more than a sharpened stick reinforced with iron. It scratches the surface of the soil rather than turning it over properly. The ox you're using, a massive, patient creature named Bruno, belongs to the village collectively. Without Bruno, you'd be trying to break the soil with hand tools, a task that would take weeks and leave you too exhausted to plant properly. But Bruno is old and tired. His ribs show through his hide, and his breathing is labored. Bruno gets straw, vegetable scraps, and whatever grass he can find while working. As you work, you think about the mathematics of survival that govern your life. Various taxes and fees for using the Lord's mill, for grazing rights, for the privilege of getting married or inheriting land take another 10%. This calculation assumes a good harvest. In bad years, when crops fail or when war disrupts the farming cycle, you'll give Lord Godwin. By midday, the sun beats down mercilessly and you're drenched in sweat. Medieval people worked in all weather. There were no sick days, no vacation time, no concept of taking a break when you felt unwell. You worked until you collapsed, and then you worked some more. Willem is a year younger than you, but he looks ancient. Your neighbor, Willem, is working the strip next to yours. Willem was lucky. He survived smallpox. Many don't. Rich or poor, young or old, everyone lives under the constant threat of illnesses that have no cure and no treatment beyond prayer and hope. His hair has gone gray. His back is permanently bent from years of labor, and his face is marked by the scars of smallpox. Disease is the great equalizer in medieval life. Smallpox, measles, typhoid, dysentery, tuberculosis. Plague, these are just names for the various ways that death comes calling. The cough that brings up blood and never stops the swelling in the neck and armpits that signals the arrival of the Black Death. You've learned to recognize the signs. The fever that starts slowly and builds until the victim is delirious. The rash that spreads across the skin like spilled wine. Instead, you rely on old Martha, a wise woman who knows which herbs might help with fever and which prayers are most effective for different ailments. Winter in medieval times isn't the cozy season of modern imagination, with warm houses and abundant food. If you're ill, you must have done something to deserve it. You'll have enough barley and oats to last perhaps 3 months if you're careful. Medicine, such as it exists, is a mixture of superstition, folk remedies, and religious ritual. The village has no doctors are for the wealthy. Martha's treatments are hit or miss. She might give you willow bark tea for pain, and willow bark does contain salicin, the precursor to aspirin, so this actually helps. Much of what you preserve will spoil anyway. You don't understand the science of food preservation, and your storage methods are primitive. But she might also recommend bleeding to balance your humors, or wearing a charm made from a hanged man's rope, or drinking a potion made from ground unicorn horn, which is actually powdered narwhal tusk and does nothing at all. You have one fireplace, but fuel is scarce. You smoke meat over fires that must be tended constantly. You salt fish and vegetables, using precious salt that costs more than silver. You're allowed to gather fallen branches and dead wood, but there's never enough. The church teaches that disease is God's punishment for sin, which means that getting sick is not only physically painful, but also spiritually shameful. This belief system makes suffering even worse, adding guilt and social stigma to physical pain. Above you are the free peasants, who own their own land and owe service to the Lord, but aren't bound to the soil as you are. As autumn approaches, the entire village becomes focused on a single desperate goal: storing enough food to survive the winter. Above them are the minor nobles like Sir Edmund, and above them, the great lords like Lord Godwin. The king owns everything, in theory, but in practice, power is distributed among the great lords who control vast territories and private armies. It's a months-long siege against starvation and cold. When disease strikes, the wealthy have access to better care. When war comes, the poor fight and die while the rich negotiate and profit. Your harvest this year is poor. The late spring and wet summer have reduced your grain yield by almost half. You'll wake to find your water bucket frozen solid and your breath visible in the air. And resources, these create a constant background of danger that affects everyone. but especially those at the bottom of society. You march for weeks, carrying weapons you barely know how to use, eating whatever you can forage along the way. Your family's entire wealth consists of a few silver pennies hidden in a hole beneath your hearth, a handful of chickens, your share of the village ox, and the tools your grandfather made. Battles are fought with swords, axes, and spears at close range. You've seen men cut down beside you, watched friends die slowly from infected wounds, participated in the sacking of villages much like your own. After that, you'll be eating bark bread flour mixed with ground tree bark to make it go further, and hoping that spring comes early. God made some people to rule and others to serve, and questioning this arrangement is not just rebellion, it's heresy. Justice is swift and harsh. Thieves are hanged, adulterers are stoned, heretics are burned. The process of preserving food is labor-intensive and imperfect. You've watched men drawn and quartered for treason, women burned for witchcraft, children hanged for stealing bread. These spectacles serve as entertainment and education, reminding everyone of the consequences of stepping out of line. You dry fruits and vegetables in the sun, racing against time and weather. Wars in medieval times aren't fought by professional armies in distant lands. They were fought by conscripted peasants in your own fields and villages. You attend Mass every Sunday, whether you're sick or well, whether the weather is fair or foul. Your house is not designed for winter comfort. The walls are thin, the roof leaks, and there's no insulation beyond the straw you stuff into the worst cracks. During Lent, you give up what little meat you normally eat. During Advent, you prepare for Christmas with additional prayers and penances. The tithe 10% of everything you produce goes to support priests who live better than you do. Pilgrimages to shrines can cure diseases and grant forgiveness for sins. You believe that God has a plan, that your suffering has meaning, that there's a better world waiting after death. Blaise for throat ailments, St. Lucy for eye problems, St. Anthony for lost objects. You carry a rabbit's foot for luck and wear a cross to ward off evil. Wood belongs to Lord Godwin, and taking it without permission is theft punishable by death. On the coldest nights, your family will huddle together for warmth, sharing body heat under whatever blankets and furs you've managed to accumulate. The fire will die down to embers, and ice will form on the inside of your walls. Frostbite is common. You've seen men lose fingers and toes to the cold, and you've seen children who never wake up after particularly harsh nights. The local priest, Father Benedict, is better fed, better housed, and better educated than anyone else in the village. The cold kills as surely as disease or starvation, and it kills slowly, giving you time to understand exactly what's happening. Chapter 7. The social hierarchy of survival medieval society is rigidly stratified, and your position at the bottom of that hierarchy affects every aspect of your survival. Above them are the merchants and craftsmen, who live in towns and deal in money rather than crops. At the very top sits the king, a figure so remote that he might as well be mythical. This hierarchy isn't just social, it's literally a matter of life and death. When food is scarce, the lords eat first. You've never seen a gold coin. A single feast at Lord Godwin's castle would cost more than your family will see in a decade. The church reinforces this hierarchy by teaching that social position is divinely ordained. The priest reminds you every Sunday that your suffering in this life will be rewarded in the next, but only if you accept your lot with proper humility. Violence is woven into the fabric of medieval life. Wars between lords, raids by bandits, conflicts over land. You've lived through 3 wars in your short life. When Lord Godwin goes to war, he takes every able-bodied man with him. Medieval warfare is brutal and personal. The rules of chivalry apply only to nobles fighting other nobles' peasants, are fair game for anyone. But war isn't the only source of violence. Bandits roam the roads, preying on travelers and isolated farms. The Lord's men-at-arms maintain order through fear, and that fear touches everyone. You've seen public executions, their community events, attended by entire families. In a world where death lurks around every corner and suffering is the norm, religion provides both comfort and additional burden. The church is the only institution that touches every life, from the grandest cathedral to the smallest village chapel. Your faith is deep and genuine. It has to be, because it's often the only thing standing between you and despair. These beliefs help you endure hardships that would otherwise be unbearable. But the church also demands its share of your meager resources. The church owns vast estates worked by serfs like yourself. Religious observance structures your week and your year. You believe in omens and portents, in lucky charms and protective spells. You observe the numerous feast days and fast days that mark the church calendar. Superstition fills the gaps that religion doesn't cover. You know which saints to pray to for different problems. Saint, the line between religion and superstition, is blurry. The church officially condemns many folk beliefs, but it also incorporates others into its practices. Holy relics, fragments of saints' bones, pieces of the true cross, vials of holy water, are believed to have miraculous powers. Your life follows the rhythm of the agricultural year, a cycle that has remained unchanged for centuries and will continue unchanged for centuries more. Each season brings its own challenges and its own small mercies. Spring is the season of hope and hunger. Hope because the long winter is ending and new crops can be planted. Hunger because the stored food from last year's harvest is running low, and the new crops won't be ready for months. This is the hungry gap, when families survive on thin gruel and whatever wild plants they can forage. You know which plants are edible and which are poisonous. Knowledge passed down through generations of necessity. Dandelion greens, wild onions, nuts, and berries. These supplement your meager diet and sometimes mean the difference between life and death. But foraging is risky. Eating the wrong mushroom or berry can kill you, and the symptoms of poisoning often don't appear until it's too late for treatment. Summer is the season of work. The crops must be tended, constantly weeded, watered, protected from pests and diseases. A few weeks of neglect can ruin an entire year's work. You work from dawn to dusk, 7 days a week, because the growing season is short and the margin for error is non-existent. Autumn is the season of harvest and preparation. Everything depends on bringing in the crop successfully and preserving enough food for winter. Grain left too long in the field will rot or be eaten by birds and rodents. The entire village works together during harvest time. because speed is essential. There's little work to be done in the fields, but there's plenty of work maintaining tools, repairing buildings, and caring for animals. Winter is the season of endurance. You've learned not to become too attached to babies until they re old enough to walk and talk. Life expectancy is short. Most people die before age 40, and many don't make it past childhood. Mostly though, winter is about surviving until spring, staying warm, making food last, and hoping that sickness doesn't come calling. Chapter 11. The Fragility of Life. 2 babies died within days of birth. Thomas survived, though he bears the marks of malnutrition and childhood diseases. Baby Mary is still fighting for life, and you're not sure she'll win. But you also accept that death might come at any time, and you try to be ready for it. Death is a constant companion in medieval life. You've buried both your parents, 3 siblings, and 2 children who didn't survive infancy. You don't plan for the future the way modern people do. There's no point in making long-term plans when you might not survive the winter. Infant mortality is staggering. Of every 10 babies born, only 6 will live to see their first birthday. Of those 6, perhaps 4 will reach adulthood. Disease, malnutrition, accidents, and violence claim the rest. Women face additional dangers. Childbirth is often fatal. 1 in 10 women dies giving birth, and many more suffer complications that leave them permanently disabled. These celebrations remind you that you're part of something larger than your own struggle for survival. There are moments of joy, celebration, and community that make this struggle worthwhile. When your neighbor's daughter marries the blacksmith's son, the entire village celebrates. When a baby is born healthy and strong, it's a victory for the entire community. A particularly beautiful sunset, a successful hunt that brings fresh meat to the table, a letter from a relative in a distant village. These small gifts help sustain you through the difficult times. There are no doctors to help with difficult births, no understanding of infection or hygiene, no pain relief beyond herbs and prayers. Your wife Mabel has given birth 4 times. There's music and dancing, storytelling and games. For a few precious hours, you forget about hunger and cold and disease. You understand the true value of food, shelter, and safety. The constant presence of death shapes how you think about life. You focus on immediate needs, finding enough food for today, staying warm tonight, making it through the current crisis. You share tools with your neighbors, help with their harvests, care for their children when they're sick. You fight for survival with everything you have. This doesn't mean you're hopeless or fatalistic. You've made your peace with God, confessed your sins, and prepared your soul for judgment. Your life is hard, but it's your life. Your family is poor, but they're your family. Your home is humble, but it's your home. Despite the hardships, life in medieval times isn't entirely grim. Harvest festivals bring the entire village together to celebrate a successful crop. This mutual dependence creates bonds stronger than blood. You eat better than you have in months, drink ale until your head spins, and laugh until your sides ache. Religious festivals provide similar relief. Christmas, Easter, and the feast days of various saints are occasions for community celebration. The church provides special foods, and the normal rules of fasting and penance are temporarily relaxed. Marriage and birth bring joy even in the midst of hardship. There's music and dancing, special foods prepared from hoarded ingredients, and a sense of hope for the future. Even ordinary moments can bring unexpected pleasure. You've learned to find joy in simple things. The warmth of the fire on a cold night, the taste of fresh bread, the sound of your children's laughter, the feeling of accomplishment when you complete a difficult task. These moments of happiness are brief and precious, but they're real. Living in medieval times has taught you lessons that modern people never learn. You know how to make do with very little, how to repair things instead of replacing them, how to find uses for everything and waste nothing. You've learned patience, the patience to wait for crops to grow, for wounds to heal, for winter to end. You've learned resilience, the ability to keep going when everything seems hopeless, to find strength you didn't know you had, to survive losses that would break a weaker person. You've learned the importance of community. In a world where individual survival is nearly impossible, cooperation isn't just helpful, it's essential. They do the same for you. You've learned to read the signs that matter. The color of the sky that predicts tomorrow's weather. The sound a sick animal makes. The look in a person's eyes that means they won't survive the night. These skills can't be learned from books. They come only from experience, and the price of that experience is often suffering. Most importantly, you've learned to appreciate what you have. In a world where everything can be lost in an instant, gratitude isn't just a virtue, it's a survival skill. As night falls over the village of Millbrook, you return to your small hovel, exhausted from another day of labor. Your wife's cough has worsened, and you know that winter will bring new challenges. But you've survived another day, and that's no small achievement. You lie down on your straw mattress, listening to the sounds of the village settling into sleep, the lowing of cattle, the cry of a baby, the distant howl of wolves in the forest. These sounds have remained unchanged for generations, and they'll continue long after you're gone. You reap part of an unbroken chain of human survival that stretches back to the beginning of time and forward to futures you can't imagine. Your life is hard, but it's not meaningless. Your struggles, your small victories, your daily acts of courage and endurance, these matter even if no one will remember your name. The medieval world is harsh and unforgiving, but it's also real in a way that modern life often isn't. Every day is a test of your strength, your will, your ability to adapt and survive. You face that test with whatever resources you have, physical, mental, and spiritual, and somehow, against all odds, you endure. As you drift off to sleep, you don't dream of easier times or better worlds, but choosing to keep living, one day at a time. You dream of tomorrow, another chance to tend your crops, to care for your family, to face whatever challenges come your way. And perhaps, in the end, that's enough. In the morning, you'll wake up and do it all again, because that's what survival means, not just staying alive. The church bells will ring at dawn, calling you to another day of labor and struggle. But they'll also remind you that you're still here, still breathing, still part of the great human story of survival against impossible odds. Sleep well, knowing that the struggles of the past have led to the comforts of the present. and that the human spirit's capacity for endurance is truly remarkable. The medieval world may be gone, but the lessons it teaches about resilience, community, and the preciousness of life remain as relevant today as they were 700 years ago. Sweet dreams of simpler times when survival itself was the greatest victory of all.